would really very much like to thank everyone for joining me. Michael said I was going to talk about who are learning developers. I'm going to ask the question, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research that I'm doing. So I'm interested in talking about what learning developers do, because I'm interested in who we are, and therefore I'm interested in our identity. And the reason I'm interested in that is because I think it may be able to say something about what's going on in higher education, if not in other countries, at least in the UK. So that was my hunch, if you like. And so I got started on what was I have to use my controls, that's better. I got started on a doctoral study back in 2012, an awful long time ago, but I've been doing this part-time, and I'm still at quite an early stage. I've been gathering data by interviewing learning developers and watching them in practice, and now I'm at the stage where I'm just beginning to try to interrogate some of my data to see if I can come up with something of significance to say about higher education, having extrapolated from the experience of learning developers. So my research question is on the slide there. How do those involved in learning development, and I think for that we can also read academic language and learning advisors, tertiary learning advisors, study skills tutors, etc. How do those involved in this amazing field, how do we describe what it is that we do, and what do these experiences that we have and our understandings tell us about what's going on in universities? I felt that was a relevant question to ask, purely on the basis, on the basis of the fact that our field is relatively new and has emerged and grown quite quickly. Certainly in the UK, in the UK, the association has grown from about 2007, but we had a mailing list going on between people interested in this kind of work from around 2002. There were regional groups going before then, but the field itself is not much more than 20 years old, really. So the fact that it's grown quickly means that it's perhaps saying something about higher education. Now, I hope folks won't mind if I just keep on with my presentation. I will have time for questions, but I'm going to plough through some material before I open up for questions. So I hope that's okay. I'm just going to go back one there, because I wanted to just stress that one reason for studying learning development might be to ask, can learning developers make a difference? Can they do anything? Have they any agency? So I could be questioning the extent to which the practitioners in this area have succeeded in creating a field, a pedagogy, a discipline. So that in itself seems a good reason to be looking at our field. I want to stress that my study is it's an insider view. I've been personally involved in the development of the field here, so I'm not pretending to be objective. I want to tell you a little bit about my research orientation. My approach is based on a motivation to improve things. So I'm coming not from the perspective of someone seeking to do an objective study. It's a motivated study, and it's also a critical approach. It's critical in the sense that I come from a perspective where I see higher education as having a very problematic relationship with students and potential students, in that it, certainly in the UK, has been up until the middle part, or the 3/4 way through the last century, a very elitist and exclusive area, we've only relatively recently got to a stage where about a bit less than half of young people who leave school go into higher education institutions. So I'm coming at my research with that as a perspective. So it's a critical approach, looking for ways to improve the provision of higher education more generally. So to be a bit more specific, in my methodology, in the way that I'm interrogating my data, I'm making use of a tool called critical discourse analysis, for, drawing very largely on the work of Norman Fairclough. It says here as a primary tool. It's certainly one of the tools I'm using for categorizing and interrogating data. Critical discourse analysis is a way of questioning, there's the critical questioning language, discourse language in use, how it's used, questioning how language is used and trying to analyze that, understand what implications that has for society more generally. So it's a social study, a concern with the relationships between the structures of society more broadly and what we do in our day-to-day professional and personal relationships, and how we talk about our work and our lives. So to come back to learning development, my study is motivated by an interest in the extent to which learning development exemplifies some of what's going on in higher education. In the UK, that's the massification or the very rapid expansion that took place during the 1990s. And more recently, in the early part of the 21st century, the increasing commercialization of higher education, the removal of much central funding, and the marketization of the sector with associated characteristics such as increased notion of competition between universities and league tables, etc. So a bit more specifically then about using critical discourse analysis. This tool is enabling me to move between specific texts or things that people have said, the data that I've gathered when I've been interviewing learning developers or watching them in practice and making notes. So examples that have been collected from there, and then moving the gaze from that very micro level to social structures or orders of discourse, as Foucault would have put it, in terms of the structures of our society being structured themselves very largely through language and how people use language. That's this idea of orders of discourse as a wider structure. So drawing links between specific articulations and utterances of LDers in their day-to-day practice and the concept of neoliberalism. And I'm using that in the sense that Pierre Bourdieu used it, meaning creating the conditions in which the state will withdraw its involvement in education, health, and in order to create conditions for the market to be able to work, to provide those services through marketized and monetized relationships. And of course, that's very much what's happening to higher education in the UK at the moment. So that's the broader context, if you like. So I'm looking at very micro levels of discourse, speech, practice, utterance, and seeing if I can draw any relationship to the broader social context. So now I'm kind of narrowing my gaze even further here and inviting you to think of 5 questions. I've taken these from discourse analysts Martin Reisigal and Ruth Wodak. They're 5 heuristic questions to enable us to create a framework through which we might be able to learn. These 5 questions, which are listed on this slide, how are persons, objects, phenomena, events, processes and actions named and referred to linguistically? So this is an attempt to take data and ask questions in order to see what we can glean in terms of moving from the local and the particular to the global and the social. So this first one is how a person's, objects or phenomena named, refer to that as nomination. Secondly, what characteristics or qualities and features are attributed to social actors, objects, phenomena, events and processes. So this is about what assumptions are made, and Reisinger and Wodak call that predication. I'll come on to that in a minute. Thirdly, what arguments are employed in the discourse in question, and this means what explicitly what forms of logic are being used, what models of causation, if you like, or explanation come through in what is being said. Fourthly, from what perspectives or points of view are these nominations, attributions and arguments expressed? And then lastly, are these utterances articulated overtly? Does the speaker self-consciously, or if you like, say what they are doing when they're building their argument or making assumptions? And are they, or does the speaker seem to be unaware of that? And then are these things being intensified in the language used with exaggeration or emphasis, or are they being mitigated or hedged or made to seem small? So those 5 questions are just one example of the way that we can use critical discourse analysis, and I've had a go at interpreting or analysing some of my data using those questions, among other things. So what I would like to do now is just pause for a moment to see if any of you has any questions you would like to ask at this stage. I can see someone is typing. Someone from Bradford, R.D. Elder, is typing. There could be a question coming. I hope Michael's going to edit these bits out, or folks who help Michael. Right, okay. Hi, Russell. That's a very good question, because you've reminded me that I needed to explain that although my study is certainly not setting itself up to be an objective or empirical study, it is a study which has been thought through in terms of trying to get a sample, a motivated sample. A purposive sample, of respondents from the sector. So I've spoken to folk in universities in Scotland, England, and I'm going to talk to folk in Wales, and I've tried to get examples of people in from institutions that are both, including our old universities, our traditional universities, our sort of plate glass mid-20th century universities, and our late 20th century post-1992 universities. And I've found that lots of people have wanted to participate. Sandra, am I also using Makiri and the silences, the things that cannot be said? My goodness, I'll have to look into that, Sandra. I am looking at linguistic. I'm looking at linguistic features, but of course paralinguistic features are also relevant. So I think it's certainly something that I will take into consideration. Hi Lee, I'm engaging learning development professionals. What I'm trying to do with my research is I'm trying to develop or construct a viable lens, if you like, through which we could look and hopefully see something new or something more clearly, particularly about higher education. That's my kind of my broad inspiration for doing this research. It may sound incredibly lofty and unrealistic, and I was a callow 40 something when I conceived the idea, and I'm still at it many years later. Okay, I can see Victoria is asking, have I started to identify differences between learning development responses from the older and newer universities? No, I haven't got to that stage as yet, Victoria, and my sample is pretty small. I think I will have interviewed a total of 18 or 19 people by the end of it, and observed about 10 learning development sessions in practice. So it's a smallish sample, and I'm not expecting to be able to identify trends that would be meaningful in the sense of representing the sectors. I think my study is more looking at, can we construct any picture of a learning development identity that will tell us something about what's going on in higher education more generally. But it's an interesting point, and I will, if I do come across significant differences, I will obviously be interested in them. No further questions at this stage. Okay. And please, from here on, I would feel happy for anyone to interrupt and put their hand up if they wanted to ask a question or ask a question in chat. So I'm going to give a couple of examples based on data that I've gathered to date. Just getting to myself. Okay. So just to remind people, I'm looking primarily at what Reisigal and Wodak call call discourse functions. Actually, they don't use that term, discourse function. I've used that, but what they're talking about is what they think are the sorts of strategies people are employing in their speech, naming, assumptions being made, arguments being developed, perspective being represented, and things being more or less intensified or mitigated. So, and those strategies, when people are speaking, are not necessarily totally conscious either, and to some extent critical discourse analysis is a way of helping us to reveal what influences from social structure might be evident in everyday speech. So what themes are emerging? Well, the sorts of themes that are emerging for me when I'm looking at my data, there are very many of them. They are to do with how do we work with students? How do we conceive of students? What are the most effective ways of helping students make sense of their learning? What theoretical approaches do learning developers have? Is the term learning development, and I appreciate it's not the term that's used in all of our countries, but is the term that practitioners prefer, is it viable? Is it contested? And so that's a big theme and has been evident in our professional circle right from the start, because many of us struggled to rename the work that we did to avoid it seeming to be remedial. So I've chosen a couple of examples based around that theme rather than any of the others, although quite a number of other themes are emerging. Positioning, as I've put it, and the naming of names. Names do contribute to how we are positioned or how we position ourselves. So social struggle is very evident in nomination, in the naming of names. I've just put a few examples of the sorts of post title that you might come across in the UK. Many of us prefer learning development academic or learning development professional, learning development advisor. I just want, as an aside, to say if you're interested in looking at some of the data that's in the public domain, I'm also working with some of this, is available through the Aldine Professional Development blog, where you can find some really interesting diary entries from learning developers over the last couple of years, and also comments on how they explain what they do. How do you explain what your job is to someone else? And I'm sure many folk will have undertaken that kind of an enterprise with their friends. When people have said, "Learning developer, what's that? What do you do?" There's also linked to the blog an amazingly useful collection of example job descriptions and job titles. Okay, so I've chosen the theme of how we refer to our work and the names that we have, and I've just got a couple of examples to give you a bit of a flavour of how I'm working. So this is the first one. So the professional learning developer that I was working with, S1, she said, "There's something problematic about the terminology. When I say learning development, colleagues say, 'Oh, you mean study support?' And later in the interview, she said, 'I tend to talk of being a writing tutor, working on academic writing, because that's a concrete practice my colleagues can understand. That takes the focus away from a conceptualization of my work as remedial.' So, in attempting to undertake some critical discourse analysis on that particular example, I've using Reisel and Wodak, I've had a think, and some of the notes that I've made are here. I noted that in the utterance, it seemed to be exemplifying how practitioners who identify, that's in the UK mostly, with the term learning development, are still, after many years, in a situation where we're struggling to establish that label, that phrase, in contrast to alternatives which tend to imply something remedial, sort of learning support tutor, for example. And more recently, some of the sort of performatively inspired titles, such as effective learning advisor or effective learning tutor, are also in opposition to the kind of view of the work that practitioners, or many practitioners, prefer. So that's an example of that could come under the heading of the discourse function of nomination. I've got an example of another function, perspectivization. In terms of perspective, this is my note here. S1 positions herself here as in a professional role that the colleagues to whom she refers either need help to understand or may be misinformed about its nature. In other words, they don't know very much about what the work is, or they have an incorrect idea about it. Later in the interview, S1 states, "It's a constant challenge to define what we're doing," again indicating that the nature and the legitimacy of the work may be under question. And it kind of suggests something like a siege mentality, and that's my that's the metaphor that's come to me, and that's also part of my own experience, because of occupying a space that seems to be quite contested for a number of reasons. using the prompt, the heuristic question about what arguments are being developed, I made a note here. S1 indicates the history of argumentation in the construction of a discourse of learning development. By implication here rather than explicitly, that work to engage students in higher education practices such as academic writing is concrete, suggesting tangible and legitimate. The force of argument here relates to the legitimacy of learning development practices themselves and the corresponding legitimacy of the presence in universities of those students from WP, or widening participation backgrounds, or lower socioeconomic groups, or even international students. Oh, I don't know why my camera is doing strange things. It seems to have a mind of its own. So it would seem, if I just go back to that slide, I tend to talk of being a writing tutor working on academic writing because that's a concrete practice colleagues can understand that takes the focus away from a conceptualization of my work as remedial. So it seems to me that the argument that the speaker there is kind of working with is that the right of the students that she's working with themselves is under question, that they need remediating. So that would kind of reflect an academic literacy's approach to the work, for example. I'm just going to have a quick look at questions because I see there are a few things that have been put there. So Sandra, I've seen written in module handbooks, do you need remedial help? Yes, absolutely, do you need remedial help? It's this bizarre notion. You've been admitted to university and now you need remediating. A very strange notion of learning. And I perhaps should have said this right at the beginning, but I think it's important. I'm also very influenced in the way I'm approaching this, not just by a critical discourse analysis approach, but also the development of identity and the work that Etienne Wenger did in his book, 1998 book, Communities of Practice, that I'm sure many people will be familiar with, or at least partially familiar with. In that book, I think he helped us develop an approach that could mean that we can, that a study of identity helps us to look at what's going on in society more broadly, especially when we look not just at how we practice our identity in doing what we do, but also how we move through roles. Wenger uses the notion of trajectory to talk about that. So Dawn says, in New Zealand, some learning developers are positioned as lecturers and others as tutors. This makes a difference as to whether or not we're perceived as academic, and also if we have a research component to our roles. And that's that comment. I've received very similar comments from colleagues in the UK, and it's a hugely important topic. And I'll refer to that actually because I've got a couple of slides making reference to that reality. Okay. In the UK, our LD roles, faculty positions, it varies. Some are academics and some are not. Unfortunately, the norm is for our roles to be non-academic, and usually on contracts that are less favourable, lower salaries, lower status, and of course that has implications for how the work itself is viewed. And okay, I think I'm going to make a little bit of progress because I can see it's half past, and I do want to allow time for some discussion a bit later on. So I just want to talk through a second example here. So S2 said, I don't mind being called a study skills tutor. It doesn't necessarily imply a deficit model. What matters is making transparent the forms and practices of higher education so students can act powerfully in what is for them an exclusionary area. Now, I thought that was a very rich extract to have a look at in terms of my critical discourse analysis framework. So here's just a few notes I made. The first one is about predication from the heuristic question, what assumptions are being made? What attributions to social actors? So S2 is attributing to her students a characteristic of being traditionally excluded from from higher education. And it kind of implies that she works with those students. That's her primary constituency for learning development work, or a primary constituency for the work. And that's something that I guess some people might challenge, but it's an interesting perspective. We'll just go back there. What matters is making transparent the forms and practices of higher education so students can act powerfully in what is for them an exclusionary arena. So she's talking about, she's making that assumption that students are generally feeling made to feel excluded or positioned as outside. So moving on to looking at the argument that's being developed there. My note says the argument she develops here echoes that of an academic literacies approach, such as Teresa Lillis was promoting in her 2003 work, that higher education practices are not self-evident to students from such backgrounds. In other words, from lower socioeconomic groups and from traditionally excluded groups, minority ethnic groups, etc. And furthermore, that awareness of the rules and conventions of these practices is an essential underpinning for powerful agentive behaviour. Now, that to me seems a very empowering argument that the speaker is trying to develop. She's saying, look, what matters here is assisting, working with our students to make the conventions of what's going on in higher education apparent to them, to help them understand them, to give them opportunities to interact with the institution more powerfully, to give them opportunities to participate in ways that will be perhaps taken more seriously. It's about knowing the rules of the game, for example, and developing the confidence to challenge those rules as well. So a very emancipatory kind of argument being developed in that extract. In terms of perspective, the perspective, and of course these heuristic questions do tend to generate material that overlaps. So I'm not trying to set these categories in stone. I'm seeing them as quite fluid. So perspective being developed, it suggests the position of an advocate for students in their pursuit of successful participation in higher education, and implies an anti-elitist and pro-democratic or universalist view of higher education. I've referenced Ron Barnett's 2014 work as an example of such a view. And higher education being an arena wherein social power can be developed, or social capital can be developed, through one of Wenger's phrases, through identities of participation and transformation. S2, let's just go on to the next slide for that bit. So I think the argument is intensified here in the way that S2 states, I don't mind being called a study skills tutor. She's saying, well, that's not the important thing. The important thing is the work with the students. So she's kind of emphasizing her argument there about what really matters, and it's about working with students to help them achieve their maximum socially. So for the rest of the session, I've got I'm going to offer some further extracts that I've gathered, and I'm not expecting you to do any complex analysis here in the session, but I offer them in the spirit that of collaboration and with the invitation to email me or to, if you don't comment here and now, to email or make comments publicly about what you see as of significance here. So just to remind you about the kind of questions I'm asking, what do these things tell us about the identity of learning developers, how they're indicative of the field, and do they tell us anything more about higher education more generally. So I've got 5 examples. I'm just going to, before I start on them, I'm just going to double check the text to see what I've missed. Okay. Mandy was asking, can we clarify what we mean by a faculty position? Okay, so an academic position. In other words, a position where the main aspect of the contract is to teach and research, and there's usually a requirement to publish as well, to participate in programs of study, committees, teaching, marking, assessment, as well as engaging in support for learning. Yes, I can see various others have commented on the roles. So I can't see any key questions that I need to address right now. So I'm going to just head off into the realms of my so far unanalyzed material, or at least I've only done some very sketchy work on the following. So the first one, now this speaker, you'll see, I thought was illustrating that there are tensions and contestations associated with the work. So just to give you a flavour of what's going on here, he was saying, in some cases there's resistance, meaning to working alongside learning developers from members of faculty, from members of academic staff. So it's from people setting the questions, because they're seeing it as you coming in critiquing their work. So if you just want to see a student confidentially, they don't know about it, that's fine. But I'm not going to have you come in and talk to me about why I'm setting the essay question the way I am, even though clearly it's in their interest. Your students are failing, and you're saying the same thing again and again. Write an essay in the form of a report. I'm quoting here, the speaker said. And the students come to the learning developer and they say, I must be really stupid. I don't understand. I don't understand what they want me to do. Again, the learning developer says, why should I see 20 students in a row feeling that way and knowing that's the tip of the iceberg, that they're the ones that had the confidence to come, and there's 40 more out there? You're literally saying to folk, meaning saying to students, would you mind going and saying to your mates about this? You could do them all a favour. I must admit, I think it's a very rich extract that gives us an indication of some of the tensions that can exist between so-called faculty or academic and staff who are either not on an academic contract but tasked to do academic work, or on an academic contract but who, because they're not within a discipline or teaching on a specific program, are still not given the credibility or equal status for the work they're doing. I can see Mandy saying that really resonates. I'm sure it will do with a number of colleagues. I'm moving on to the second example. The second of my 5, and here I've given it the provisional title, "A Vision of University?" ? So this speaker was saying, you see the risks those students took in there by that creativity, showing their shared lives, bringing their external worlds, their external cultures, bring that outside world into the university with them. When they're in this university, they're not alone. They've got each other and like-minded tutors and support around the university. But they've still got their communities outside. We want to encourage them to recognise the values of those communities outside, inside. And I don't mean that in a mishy-mashy, multicultural way. I mean it in a really deep, democratic and learning way. That's how learning takes place and democracy operates, by empowering people and letting them have a voice. Again, I find a really fascinating extract because of the overtly political view of the work that it expounds, and explaining that the work is political in the sense that it's about making use of our social resources, both within the institution and outside of the institution, without that seeming to be in any way strange or unusual. The speaker is implying that this should be a completely legitimate way of working in the university. And just to give you a little bit of context, what he was talking about was a particular session with students where they were invited to respond in whatever way they felt was appropriate to their experience of learning at the university. So it was deliberately a creative exercise that the speaker was speaking about, and saying how potent it had been in that what the learners did, what the participants did, was that they brought in resources that related to their background, their community, aspects of their identity that are normally not able to be used legitimately in the university. Fascinating stuff. So, moving on to another speaker here, which I thought would be a useful example to give. The speaker says, "My concern at every encounter is to move that learning on in whatever way that means." So very often we're talking about confidence, certainly, engaging or re-engaging with a learning experience, demystifying the routes into learning. One of the things that coming out of my research, and I'm sure it won't be necessarily surprising to you folks, is that a very key characteristic of people in these kinds of roles is that they see an element of advocacy in their work. They don't necessarily see it in the very overtly political way of the speaker before last, but they do very often see it perhaps in the way that this speaker is implying, that the learning developer or the language and learning advisor or the learning specialist can work alongside, can travel with the student in helping them to make to blow away the mists that obscure what needs to be done in order to be successful in academic life. Okay, outsiders and infiltrators. This particular speaker uses that notion of infiltration. And we were at a point in the conversation where something he had said made me ask, are you saying we're outsiders? He said, I think sometimes we are. I think we get really good at infiltrating other communities. I'm sure you've heard it from other learning developers, that there are some parts of this institution that actually don't welcome us in. For parts of this institution, we're definitely outsiders. We know what we are, he said a little later on. I'm not sure our managers and senior managers know what we are. And sometimes we're outsiders because we're not given entry to those areas. For example, here, we're not on academic contracts. We're not faculty, in other words. And that immediately excludes us from some conversations, cross-university conversations. It precludes us from having a research profile, unless we are minded to use our own time to do it. So I think it makes it very difficult, not very difficult, but it means we have to work very, very hard to gain credibility with academic staff here. So once again, this notion of occupying very contested space and not not being seen as legitimate or equal to faculty or academic staff, despite being very significantly involved in what's clearly academic work. In other words, working with students to make sense of their learning at university. Now this speaker, I've said guardedly aspirational. I'm not quite sure that's the right way to put it, but so he was saying what we actually want, I think, and hope, is to get together and see how we could all be working under the heading of academic developer. So it would be nice to do that, but again, the direction things are going in, I don't see that happening, at least not officially. What we've got to do is try and carve out that space ourselves. And again, being seen as meta-disciplinary, I think it's really important to have the kind of role that we, in theory, have, where you're staff-facing as well as student-facing. You become the hinge. You should have the constructive, connecting hinge. Sorry, you should become the constructive, connecting hinge between the two. Which is, I think, a really interesting metaphor for a learning developer to use to refer to that Janus-like role that we have facing both directions. But unlike the Janus, I think actually that's a wrong image to give. The aspiration here is about unifying the approach, working alongside and on an equal basis with other academics and those who may be interested in developing the practice of academics, so academic developers or educational developers as they're often referred to in the UK. Was that my last? Yes, this is my references slide, and I think what I'd like to do, so I see we've got a few minutes left, is to see if any folk want to come in with specific questions or indeed suggestions or feedback of any kind. Yes, it's a lovely image. A satellite orbiting a dead planet looking for signs of life to nurture. Let's hope there was some water there to bring the planet back to life. I'm just looking to see if I need to respond. I don't think there are any questions that I need to respond to. So what I'm going to do then, folks, is I think I need to wrap up. I can see it's 10:02, but I'm more than happy to attempt to answer any questions people might come forward with. Or indeed, if there's anything you would like me to try to make clearer about what I'm doing. I'm hoping that I will complete this doctoral research and write my dissertation within the next, oh my goodness, I want to do it within a year, but I suspect it may be about 18 months. Okay. Some nice comments there, so thank you very much indeed. Sorry, a question. Have people shared ideas about how to raise the status of learning development roles more? Yeah, I think what certainly comes out is that the value in our association is absolutely massive, and that's where I would really encourage those of you who haven't seen it to go and have a look on the Aldine Professional Development blog. I'm just going to go back to the slide with the link to it. This is such a fascinating and useful resource. Okay, I'm just checking. Dawn, I'm so pleased that you're with us. I hope you have a lovely day. Michael, can I just check? Are we due to finish at 10:02, or are we okay to continue if people have further questions?
You can probably continue on for about another 5 minutes. and then we'll switch over to our next presenter.
Okay, well, in the couple of minutes or so that are remaining, one thing I would like to say is that I'm extremely grateful to the people who've allowed me to come and watch them working in their learning development practice and to talk to them, because this work, as I said right at the beginning, is to the extent that doctoral work can be, I'm trying to make it collaborative, and I really want to be able to share the work more widely. I think just going back to answering the question that I've forgotten who it was that was asking, but about how we can promote our work. It certainly feels to me that the work of Aldine in the UK and of the associations in the Learning Specialists Association in Canada, and ATLANS in New Zealand, and AAL in Australia makes such a difference. And in the UK now we're having more regional events, which I think is a really good way forward. But the fact that we have such active colleagues who are blogging, Sandra, who's present in this session, is probably one of the most prolific. I think that makes such a huge difference to colleagues feeling supported. Rowena, is the neoliberal context important here in that problems with learning are not seen as systemic but are individualized? Absolutely. Rowena, I'm not sure if you were in at the beginning, but I wanted to make very clear that I'm coming from the perspective, certainly from Pierre Bourdieu's perspective, on what's going on in our economies more broadly, and the neoliberal turn, which has really taken hold of pretty much all aspects of life. And that has accelerated so rapidly in the UK since the introduction of fees, and we really see how the monetization of relationships between students and employees of the university affects in a negative way our ability to do the work of developing learning in the way that many of us conceive that. Not to say that we can't still do that work, but it's as if there are more and more hurdles in the way that we kind of have to clutter, that we have to push out of the way before we can get down to it. And I think that's why the example that I was sharing a minute or two ago of the learning development situation, this one here, where the learning developer is talking about a situation where the students were encouraged to respond creatively to their experiences of learning. You can see the power in that, in that it enabled in that session students to talk about their personal background, their communities, and relate those to their experiences of learning. Okay, I think I'm going to shut up now. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that wants to be responded to. Okay, Chetna, no, I haven't spoken to any math specialists. That's a deficit on my part. I'll perhaps see if I can remedy that. Thank you very much, folks. Thanks for all your comments.